We've got another panel, and then we're going to have some reflections from yesterday, and then a final closing, and then it will be 6 o'clock, which will be the end of the second day of this conference. There is a third day, of course, to come tomorrow for a much smaller group of people, but a much more active networking day without any formal presentation, so it'll be very different in tone tomorrow. Who was that? Where's that hat, which we have specially for people who make that kind of comment, John? Luckily, I didn't see who that was. I can't say what a pleasure it is to have this final panel assembled, because it has a characteristic which we've never before seen at a responsible tourism conference, which is that the man is now going to disappear and hand over to Jane, who is chairing what is effectively an all-female panel. And interestingly, dealing with arguably the most important topic of the whole conference. So we're really pleased, Jane, to hand over to you. That's for the sake of the camera, that's all.
Oh. I'm delighted that this topic's on the agenda as well, because just a reflection from my point of view, 10 years, 12 years ago when I started getting involved in sustainability, my focus was very much about, well, the focus of this conference really, what are the issues, working with stakeholders on what are the solutions, working with stakeholders and particularly inside the organisation on implementation, and reporting was hardly anything to do with my role, very, very small part. And nowadays, in 10 years, the landscape has changed so much, and reporting within my small team at the group division of TUI, it's a real struggle to stop reporting being the majority of what we do, and to stop the costs of verification and auditing of what we report being taking up the majority of my reasonably small budget. So it's great to hear from these experts as to how much they think reporting is really bringing benefits to sustainable tourism progress, where it's going in the future and what the pitfalls are. So if I can hand over to Jen.
So I'm Jenefer Bobbin from Just Report. So I'm going to just take you through the business which has been set up this year. It came from my dissertation, which started in 2009. So we've got the title there. I went to Nepal to run a pilot project as part of the dissertation, where I worked with 5 accommodation providers and 5 trekking agents. At the end of the process, I ended up with 2 accommodation providers and 1 trekking agent who completed the process. After I completed my master's, the clients or the pilot project participants were keen for it to continue, which is where the business came on. What the business does in a nutshell is it helps with SMEs, but actually in Nepal it's mainly micro businesses, to monitor their social, economic and environmental impacts. We also help them market their achievements, which is done through digital channels such as our website, social media, and also through their digital channels as well. One of the main reasons they do it is well, they do it for their marketing achievements, but also we help associations and organisations and destinations. They can use this to monitor their members as well. So basically what I started with when I first went to Nepal was I started with just monitoring tools. So my aim was to collect people's information on the 3 categories that I mentioned, and then I expected them to be able to do what, the reporting and the distribution of the information themselves. So I gave them just these 3 tools. I did help them fill them out, but what I realised in Nepal is that they actually didn't have the information ready to be able to give it to me. So in some companies they actually couldn't even tell me how many members of staff they had. They had to go through piles of paperwork to get the sort of basic information we think. So then I collected these or built these supporting tools, which is to help the businesses actually collect the information. So it was collecting the staff information, looking at the supply chain, the charity, waste management. So this is just an example of the waste one. And then for businesses actually who had their own tools, we just collected the very minimum off them at the end, which is the submission tool. And also I gave them some indicators. So they actually, a lot of people didn't really even know what responsibility was. They just wanted to do the right thing. So they wanted to look after the environment and look after their community. So actually explaining to them what responsible tourism was, I had to do that to help them. So after my naive start in Nepal, I realised that actually I had to offer a lot more services than just monitoring tools. So it came with help sheets, because obviously I can't sit with every business. It's not financially feasible to do that. So detailed help sheets. I will say actually a lot of this is still being built, so the help sheets are still in the process. So this is all very new. Online support, face-to-face support. I now have a business partner in Nepal, Jill, who's back there, and she, because she's in Nepal, she lives in Nepal, it means that it's a lot easier for me to be for us to be able to help people face to face. We also were able to offer the report writing service. Jill can write English, I can't, so we were able to do that. And I actually come from a digital marketing background, so with design and stuff. So we actually helped by offering the infographic production, and then also to give them sort of third-party assurance. We offered a verification visit. A lot of people have asked me who am I to say that it's right, but it's all done through paper trails. So, they show me electricity bills, everything like that, I can take photos of it, so it doesn't really matter who I am at the end of the day. And then the promotion services. So that's a little bit brief of how we went through it. So then I'm just going to look at 2 case studies that I've got. So this is Tiger Mountain Pokhara Lodge. I've been working with them since 2008, and they are what I call a front runner in Nepal. They're doing really good things over there. They're established. They actually are owned by international and Nepali mix. Their turnover is good. This is one of the infographics. I will stress that it is in process, so there is Latin in it, which they don't speak in Nepal, but it's just there for holding text. But it gives you like an example of, this is the sort of the client, the business consumer end. So this is the bit that will appeal to the consumer. It's very visually pleasing, I hope, anyway. So we can see the changes since 2008. The female employment has gone up by 2%, no local employment change. This is actually because no one leaves this business because they get paid so much. The median salary has gone up by 94%. What the company wanted to do is they wanted to even out the salary spread between the lowest paid and the highest paid, so they've been concentrating on that. This reporting process has shown that actually they really don't donate very much to charity. They've gone down by 0.2%. So they actually only donated 0.1% of profits, but they do invest more hours. So they've gone up by 243 hours. This isn't just gone up by hours; it's actually from better monitoring as well. And then there's the environmental impact. So you can see that they are gradually reducing their carbon. CO2 equivalent by per bed night over the years, and that's something they are really trying to do. So, by looking at the figures, which they didn't do before, they just thought they were doing it, but now they can actually see they are reducing. Apart from the staff, who, because they're getting paid so much more, they've got stuff like Sky TV and everything in there, so theirs is going up. But I know that this business really likes the statement that they give back into the local community, the local economy, 42 teachers' annual salaries. So you can see that it's 11.1 million rupees, but it doesn't really mean much to an international market, but you can show the equivalent. So the next one, this is a company that I'm actually the most proud of. They're a typical Nepali company. They're very small. They don't make that much money. they don't like showing. In Nepal, people don't show their business, so it's not very transparent. Whereas these guys actually gave me access to the data, which I was really surprised actually when I asked, and they actually gave it to me. It did require Keshev going into his cousin's garage for 2 days to dig it all out of the paperwork, but they got it to me. And as you can see, it's like they haven't given me very much information. We haven't, like, no environmental information, anything like this, but it's a start. That's the thing. You can start small with this scheme. So, and when Keshev's face, when I told him he gave 18.1% of his profits to charity, it was initially shock, and then it was joy. So, you know, it was the fact that actually they had no idea. And I mean, you can see they don't give as much back in, you know, 2.4 teachers' annual salaries, but they're not also monitoring so much, and they're not actually monitoring their supply chain yet. But this is the first year, so hopefully in 5 years' time they'll be monitoring a lot more. Thank you.
It's been a fantastic afternoon so far, so I hope I'm not going to spoil it. And by introducing the subject of accounting, which I normally have to keep quiet or actually deny all knowledge of it at all and pretend I've never actually done the job. But my name's Jackie Brander-Brown, and as it says there, I'm actually going to be looking at an evolving accounting perspective with regard to ensuring and reporting progress within tourism and responsible tourism and sustainable tourism. Just to give you an idea of my background and how I'm talking about the accounting, I put some little letters along the bottom there, and that largely means that I'm a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. I trained with Pricewaterhouse. I then went into the hotel industry and worked in the international hotel industry. So I'm now got the letters FOSPA, which is a fellow of the Hospitality Professionals Association, and I brought along a couple of their really interesting magazines, if anybody wants to have a look at those, more of those later. And also on the other end, MIH, I'm a member of the Institute of Hospitality as well, because they let me loose on running general management within hotels. So it's a bit of a sort of management and the accounting side of it. I've used the word evolving as well, and I found it quite interesting about what you were talking about how the change has happened in terms of the number of measures that we're talking about. Because if you go back probably about 10, 12 years or so, and we actually have a look at accounting reports, you'd find very little in there about sustainability. You'd find nothing in there about responsible actions at all. If you were lucky, you might find half a page, and most of that would be a picture of blue sky and sort of green fields and nice little things like that to look at. 10, 12 years later, you go and look at a set of accounts now for most companies who are interested in this. 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 pages is not unusual. And if you're Marks and Spencer's, I know they're not in tourism, but they devote an entire website to it, in addition to their corporate website. So it's actually grown over that period quite significantly. And it means that accountants are having to run very fast to try and keep up with what's going on. So that's what I'm going to be looking at, is what that running fast has been involving and why it's been happening, and perhaps where we're going to be going in the future, including encouraging some laggards. Maybe who are not getting involved with the programme, as you might say. But just some initial sort of findings. Currently, my Easter holidays are largely going to be spent in Croatia, so that sounds quite nice. But it's doing some research with Dr. Vanja Vezogic, who was my PhD student there, and he particularly introduced me to environmental management accounting. And between us, we actually, his PhD and the research we did afterwards, we've actually worked with 40 hotels, 20 in the UK, 20 in Croatia. And in particular, it was looking at sustainability and particularly environmental accounting. And one of the sort of the early sort of conclusions that we draw, perhaps not too surprisingly, is that current business trends in hotels, particularly because that's the background that I and he come from, are very strongly oriented towards sustainable development. That's across all businesses, but here we're looking at hotels. But what that's led us to realise is that hotels really do need to seriously rethink Their sort of typical short-term financial, as it says, their financial-oriented performance information by developing effective sustainability accounting systems. And I think one of the things, the problem in terms of evolving, is that we've gone from nothing to we've gone to too much. And that's typical of accounting developments. When we actually develop new systems, we tend to start off as a baseline of nothing. We then go all the other way, too far, and then we come back to something that's more practical. And as we said there, what we're looking for is a pertinent balance of performance management indicators. Now, I said I'd sort of bring one of these back again. Mentioned there the short-term financially oriented performance information that hotels typically have. Said this is the magazine, the professional magazine of the Hospitality Professionals Association. And these are their sort of benchmarking stats that they include every month within it. There is nothing in here about environmental. There is nothing in here about sustainable. There is nothing in here about responsible. All you get is occupancy, average rate, revenue per available room, total revenue per available room, payroll percentage, and gross operating profit per available room. That's it. Nothing else. And to sort of tell you one of the bits of research that we did prior to this is that we actually went and asked a lot of hotels, do you sort of measure your customer reaction? Do you measure your internal business performance? Do you measure your sustainability? And all of our hotels said, oh yeah, definitely we're doing all of that. We're very balanced with what we're doing. And then when we actually got their sort of information back, the top 29 measures were all financial. And then there was the other information underneath. And we sort of said to them, well, where's all this balanced information? And they said, well, it's sort of informal. We keep it ourselves, literally on the back of cigarette packets in some instances, or on little post-it notes that were sort of all over the place. So what was actually happening was the question of what was formal and what was informal in terms of their systems. So that got us thinking about how do you actually rethink this short-term performance information into more sustainable, longer-term, balanced performance information. And I think it really comes down to looking at macro perspectives and then looking at micro perspectives. And the sorts of things that are affecting our sort of hotels in terms of the performance information they provide sustainability-wise is their reaction to whether they're reporting externally to the outside stakeholders or whether they're reporting internally to managers and employees. A lot of hotels and hotel companies are trying to anticipate legislation that they think is going to be happening from the UK, from the EU. If you're in Australia, you've been hit with something else. Or regulation in terms of accounting, our international financial reporting standards. Certifications, the GRI, accountability, all the other certifications that were there that want certain measures. What's going to be audited? How is it going to be audited? Who's going to be auditing? All of those anticipations. Have you got the technology to do it? Or if you haven't, is it on the back of a cigarette packet that you're actually developing? And also being aware of organisation types. There's a lot of difference between a large operator like Hilton, who has a very sophisticated system, and a B&B, as we were just finding out, who can't tell you what their occupancy rate is, let alone anything else. So we're looking at all of those sorts of situations. So the suggestion is that we have, very quickly, because I'm told my time is up, as ever, the sorts of things, and again, this is why I'm going back over to Croatia, because we're going to be working with the hotels there, identifying a clear policy and strategy up front. A lot of staff and employees just don't know what it is you're trying to do, nor your suppliers, nor your customers, so being very clear about that. We need collaboration. Don't leave these systems up to your accountants, but simply don't leave them up to the sustainability people either. It needs to be a collaboration of all members or all stakeholders involved in the business. Focus on an impact. One of the problems I saw with a research paper we've looked at is what are the number of measures that there are available, and this was done in Europe by an Italian university, and we came up with over 300 measures, which is just daft. You can't manage that. You need to be more focused, a bit like the balanced scorecard. It will need investment to do it. These systems are not cheap. The systems of collecting information is not cheap, so don't think it's free. It isn't. It's going to require investment, it's going to require resources. Quite a bit of that should be on education for your staff, for your suppliers and for your customers as well, and ongoing support for that. One of the things, again, going back to the impact, I think we need to come up with a reduced set of indicators so that we can benchmark against each other. If we're all doing different things, there's no possibility of benchmarking. So it may well be that we have a sort of required set of measures that everybody does, and then everybody else can go on and do what they want for their particular circumstances as well. And one lovely one that comes in at the end is we reward managers and their teams for profit and return on investment and things like that. Why aren't we rewarding them for their responsible nature of work? And we're actually got a leader there, not entirely again in tourism, but Ladbrokes, the betting company. I don't know if anybody's going in there tomorrow with the Grand National being on, but they are now going to be rewarding their managers. Part of their bonus on their reward package will be attached to their management of responsible gambling within their operations. And that may be something we ought to be looking at as well. So I will finish off there because I've gone over time. And contact details, if anybody wants to follow up, please do. Because I'd be very interested in sort of really getting together in terms of finding out all of these measures that people are using. Thank you. Okay.
Right, I'll do my best to stick to time, but as the other academics have already demonstrated, we're used to having at least an hour, if not 3, to get our message across. So I'm here to sort of focus in specifically on the carbon question when it comes to reporting. Now, this is an area where we don't yet have a huge amount of reporting occurring across the industry. Picking up on some comments that we've heard already today, we are now at the stage where environmental responsibility is being seen as a core business issue by well-known business leaders. And I just wanted to highlight that Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, at a stakeholder meeting in February earlier this year, said, if you want me to do things only for ROI, return on investment reasons, you should get out of this stock. And that was at a stakeholder meeting. So we are starting to see from the leaders quite staggering changes in attitudes towards what is the purpose of a business and what is our relationship with the stakeholders. You wouldn't have heard anyone saying that message 2 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So this is Archimedes' principle of the fulcrum and the lever, and I'm using this to highlight the role that reporting should play. It is not the be-all and the end-all. It is a tool. It is something on which we should be basing our decisions. It should be informing management. So if we get to the stage where we're devoting all our resource into accounting and reporting, we're doing something wrong. In my view, we're not after the perfect number, we're after the number that is good enough to tell us what action we should be taking and whether or not that action is delivering the required change. So some of you very kindly participated in a somewhat lengthy and technical survey that Harold circulated for me prior to the conference. And these were, I asked what was the reason, what you thought the reason was for managing carbon. Now this survey has also been circulated to carbon management experts. So we've got sort of 2 cohorts coming together. The response rate's only about 50, but it's quite an expert group. So the scoring from that group places 3 different ways of phrasing protecting the environment or sustainability top. So they all come out, they're not statistically different in terms of as a driver for why should we manage carbon. Then following that we get reducing costs, delivering on corporate social responsibility, and at the very bottom, winning and retaining business. Now interestingly, when we surveyed businesses, we got quite a different picture. Here the N is not a motivator, the M is a motivator, and the SM is a strong motivator. Now I will flag that 90% of the respondents here were or had been members of the Green Tourism Business Scheme, so you could consider them as very highly engaged in this as an agenda. agenda. But even so, they were identifying reducing operating costs as their key driver, followed by meeting customer expectations. What's interesting is then when we go to the consumer, we get a completely different picture again. Now, I'm not pretending this is statistically valid data here. This is from a survey one of my undergraduate students has just carried out in Manchester. And when asked to rank the following factors, so price, comfort, safety, distance, or environmental impact on choice of transport mode, price, comfort, safety, and distance come a lot higher up in the average ranking than environmental impact. It just isn't factoring. And you see a very similar thing when you ask the same question about accommodation choice and destination choice. So that leads me to the question on how do we fill the bucket of care? How do we get consumers driving change? Can we get consumers to drive change? Now, part of me thinks, no, we're going to have to bring in regulation and policy, and the starting place for that is voluntary initiatives. But my colleagues on my panel here pointed out to me this morning that people do care. If you survey them, they do care, or at least they claim a level of care. And actually what we have is a value action gap or an attitude behaviour gap. And that's something that is true at every single level, from international agreements on climate change, national government policies, right down to our individual behaviours. And it's something we're still not fully grasping or tackling in a meaningful way. So to underpin that, to underpin our understanding of what's going on in our systems and how we can achieve change, we need rules and tools. We need consistency. And the question still in carbon accounting is, what does that animal look like? So I asked lots of technical questions again about what do you think the characteristics of a meaningful carbon accounting tool should be. And this is an importance ranking. So 1 was very important and 2 was important. And really what I'm just going to highlight here is that everything is important. It needs to be robust. It needs to be accurate. We need to be able to justify it. It's got to enable reporting to standards. It's got to allow us to evaluate whether the actions we're taking are actually delivering change, and that's direction and magnitude, but direction of change more important than magnitude. As long as we know we're moving in the right direction, that number is good enough. It also needs to be easy to apply and allow us to make comparisons, and whether that's comparisons to a benchmark or over time or between different organisations in the same sector. Now, I've not shown all the options that were here. Comparisons between sectors ranked quite low. And again, in sort of discussions that we've had earlier in the day, I would suggest we need to think about the fuzzy boundaries between different sectors, and we do need to be able to compare across those. So where is the boundary between the cultural sector and the tourism sector? Where's the boundary between the tourism sector and the transport sector? We all have to be following the same rule sheet if we want to be able to consistently and easily account for our carbon. So I'm going to pull all of these up very quickly, because I've had my 1-minute warning. I think we need a staged approach to encourage early adoption. So I think what we heard in terms of what Just Report is doing is absolutely spot on. We need to provide a very simple method for the tricky part of it, the scoping. What are my significant emissions? And there should be a list of, these are the ones you should consider, and you qualify out rather than qualify in. It shouldn't require any pre-work of your data. You should be able to enter the raw data that you can collect easily. You shouldn't be having to do a calculation on a scrap of paper and then enter something else into a spreadsheet. It should track performance, my time's up, and give intensity measures and allow automatic benchmarking and reporting. My proposal for alignment, I'll just put up there. And say anyone who wants to engage in this, please do get in touch. This is the process that I think, I'll put that on the table, we need to follow. And something that we've seen in other sectors is a very rapid proliferation of standards, and that's not helpful. So they need to be aligned, and there might be a good case for having a meta standard. There's lots of businesses that form their own standards, and that's fine, but you need to say these all align to this centralised approach across the industry. And everything should be as simple as possible, but we shouldn't make it simpler. We can't pretend that this isn't a complex issue, because it is. Thank you very much.
Hi everybody, I've probably got about 2 minutes now, and the last one on. But I was just thinking, if you could apply the 6-minute rule as a ratio to your working life and spend the equivalent on reporting, these presentations would probably be really different today. So I just thought that was something to think about. Just to introduce you to myself and what my experience is in reporting. I've worked for 10 years in sustainability in large tour operating businesses, and in the last a year ago now set up my own business supporting other companies in implementation of and reporting on sustainability. Now, my kind of background, the first time I was ever asked to look at a sustainability report was basically like a blank piece of paper and write something on there that we can publish about what we're doing. And that very quickly grew to compiling reports for a FTSE listed business, where you need to work with best practice frameworks that were out there and guidelines, and reporting across all areas of sustainability, not just environment, which was pretty much where it started. And also covering areas that don't always fit anywhere else, such as accessibility and health and safety, and where we're going to include that kind of data. And diversity, which I thought was an appropriate one to mention given the panel here today. So what I'm going to talk about really is the benefits of sustainability reporting, and then some of the pitfalls of sustainability reporting, to give an even balance of both sides. So what benefits does it actually bring? Well, the old mantra that I didn't want to quote because I thought everyone will have said that today, but I've counted and only one person has said it actually all day, of what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. So that's obviously one of the key drivers for sustainability reporting. What I've found as well is that it really raises the profile of sustainability at a high level within a business. So there's nothing that quite gets sustainability onto the board agenda like reporting, and it gives a really good opening to begin to justify budgets and resources to actually drive performance in sustainability. So that's a really key benefit of the reporting agenda. Obviously, it allows businesses to demonstrate their compliance publicly. And then, as I've said before, it's about pushing forward performance within business. And I really think that that should be what sustainability reporting is fundamentally about. It should be about driving business performance and improvement. Transparency of reporting obviously builds trust, which is a fantastic way to engage with your customers and your stakeholders. And I think that sometimes gets lost in sustainability reporting, but it's a really good area to be transparent and honest about results and say when things haven't worked as well as when things have worked. And that gains a much higher level of trust with the people you're engaging with than just telling all the good news stories. Reporting highlights areas for improvement within business. There's nothing else that demonstrates where you still need to go than the results of what you've not done very well. So it really pushes forward and highlights those things that you need to focus your attention on and move forward. Then some of the kind of lost benefits of sustainability are really about awareness raising and a communications tool, and reporting can give you a means to communicate with people that you want to communicate with about what you're doing, and that's not always easy to do, and it gives you a method and a means to do that and a time of year to be able to put the effort into doing that. You can do whether that's with your staff, engaging with your staff on your report and your results, or any of your other stakeholders. Reporting also really makes you know where you stand. So whether you're ahead of the pack, whether you're behind the pack, it puts you in a position of knowing where you sit, and that benchmark that a couple of people have referred to on the panel today. And then finally, the driver of innovation. It's been mentioned a few times over the 2 days of the conference so far about sustainability as a means to drive forward innovation within business, and I think that's a really important thing that gets lost in the sustainability agenda. Having sustainability out there makes people think of new ways to do things, and that is always a good thing, and it brings positive change within business, both to products that already exist and just need adapting to be improved, or to bring about new products and new developments. So it really does help to drive that innovation within business. I think that's a really important thing that gets lost a lot. Now, one of the things I thought I'd talk about is the devil of the GRI, which some people have referred to and some people have chosen not to refer to. And I just thought I'd quickly say whether that was a help or a hindrance. So obviously the Global Reporting Initiative does offer a framework for people to report to and a starting point. It's not the only framework out there, but it's probably the first and the best known one. And it does provide credibility and baseline indicators for people to use and get going with. The new guidelines have been released recently, which have helped to kind of look at some of the things which people have complained about. And I'm not saying whether the new guidelines are any better or not, but it's kind of come about as a recognition of some of the problems of GRI, which are the weight of too many metrics to measure. You don't know where to start. You end up focusing on lots of things that actually aren't material to your business. Does it make a company better if they're ticking more boxes on how many more metrics they've reported on than another business? No, not necessarily. And small and medium-sized businesses just can't engage with it because it's far too complicated. So, where does reporting go wrong? The GRI kind of links into some of those things straight away. There's too much time and effort spent reporting, and that leaves you not enough time to actually be doing. And you need to be doing in order to be reporting on it. And that's one of the main things that gets lost in the overwhelm of reporting. There's a lot of common frameworks, and reporting requests are growing, and they end up competing with each other and adding complexity to people within business. There is argument, or you can argue about this, no particular common framework for tourism that everybody wants to work towards. The reporting can be too time-consuming and complex for small businesses, so what it does is put small businesses off from engaging with it. Now, we've heard today about how that can be adapted, which is great. It can be very company-focused, so you end up taking a very internal view of what your company's doing rather than external view, which is what sustainability should be about. It can't always be transparent enough, so you can end up with too much good news, and who is actually reading it, we don't actually really know that at the moment. And then finally, I want to talk about measurement, which is not just how do we measure it and what do we measure, which are a lot of the discussions that people are having, but also how do you interpret what comes out of it, because different people interpret what you've measured in different ways, and that's really not great for reporting as a whole. And it's too fixed, it doesn't encourage permanent communication all year round. So since my time's up, I just wanted to say that what reporting does do is help to move an industry forward, and I think that's really important. It can be a key driver in moving industry forward. I'm working with the events industry as well, who haven't really done any reporting so far, and it is a way to make them focus on what the impacts of events and conferences are, and that's something that people haven't considered before. But it has to allow for small businesses as well as big companies. We have to engage with the small business and not just the listed companies in order to make it successful. But done well, reporting can drive performance and push an industry forward and give meaningful information to stakeholders. And that shouldn't get lost in the complexity of it. So I left you with a quote, which I quite liked, which is nothing else quite motivates senior management to tackle an inconvenient ethical or environmental problem so much as the prospect of the world being in the know, and sunlight is a fantastic disinfectant. Thank you very much.
Well, if I can thank my fellow female panellists, that was really reassuring, and certainly thought that perhaps in 10 years' time we're just focusing on those, meta standards, that this is a sort of natural explosion of indicators of confusion, and it will come down to reporting that really helps us measure action and measure progress. But I think we've got a few minutes.
10 minutes for questions.
I just wanted to say that today, and Travel Mall has already covered it, we just released a piece of work from Leeds Met where we analysed the corporate social reports using GRI standards of 80 cruise companies. Basically, to give you a short summary, 65% of the cruise companies in the world don't say a single word about responsibility. 18 of them say something randomly on their website, mostly soft data from their CEO saying we're deeply committed. And only 12 companies have actually report, or they report as part of a bigger corporate company report. And if you want to know more about it, you'll just have to send me a tweet, and then I'll send you the report. And And there was no question. It was just a shameless sales pitch. Okay, but the issue, I think the issue that we've got in here is that very often we don't have enough benchmarking. We don't really have enough comparison. That one of the companies I've just talked to that was receiving this report, or was at the sharp end of this report, saying, "Oh no, we don't want to report against the GRI. It takes up too much of our time," even though they're the second largest cruise company in the world. It is difficult, but at the end of the day, the problem is that the moment you start reporting, people are going to judge on what you have reported. So that transparency, does have this issue, and it's in this sector where there is no experience.
Okay, am I loud enough now? Yes. Thank you. Two comments. One is to the GRI reporting. I was involved in some of the working groups, like on the food sector in GRI at one point. The problem is not with the industry. The problem is with NGOs who are pushing for those tons of matrices because they think industry can't be trusted. Therefore, you have to push them, and at the end it becomes meaningless. So if we have to do work, a lot of work needs to be done with the NGO community than with the industry, so that you have a balance. Yeah, just one. The other is that the comment that I want to make is, I work a lot with destinations, like 35, 40 of them now. Yesterday in the opening presentation you made, Professor, you mentioned about the impacts, and this is one of the weakest point in all destinations. I can stand up and be very self-congratulatory, but it's me. And there is a lot of it is anecdotal. There is hardly any empirical evidence of what is being achieved. And therefore, I have offered in the panel, and I'm repeating this offer, I'll be very happy to host 3 or 4 students this year. I cannot pay for everything, but if students pay their international travel, I'll cover the local cost to go to a destination and do real impact. So long as the professors can ensure quality, I think I would be very happy to do that.
I think there's two excellent points there. The challenge of reporting against all the indicators that not just NGOs but all our stakeholders want to know about, and also destination indicators. Anybody from the panel would like to comment on those?
I started GRI, so I feel obligated to finish it. I think what the GRI have tried to do is adapt to that problem of too many indicators by focusing back on materiality. And I do think materiality is really important to look at. It's not right that every business has to report on every single metric, because some metrics aren't as important to some businesses as others. And it might not just be that they're as important to some businesses as others, but also business locations and where the business is based will impact on how important those metrics are to respond to. It is really important to focus on what the key material issues are for a business, and that's what makes sustainability reporting hard, because everybody has their own key issues. But as the gentleman rightly said, every NGO wants you to report on every single issue, and that is obviously understandable, but there has to come a point where a business lays out exactly what it's going to report on and why, and if they're clear on the reasons why they are looking at those things that they consider material, I think that is the kind of key element to avoid ending up with hundreds of metrics to report on that actually aren't necessarily going to bring a business any benefit in doing so.
Did anybody have a comment to add on destination indicators? Well, all I can say is it's been very, very helpful for us as tour operators to have better grasp on the most relevant destination indicators for the destinations we operate to, so we know which areas that we can help support and focus on when operating there. Any more? Can I have one more?
Absolutely. If there's a question, preferably from you. Okay, thank you very much indeed. couple of comments from me or couple of additions perhaps to what was said on the last panel. We will definitely within the centre with Jackie and others be doing a lot more work on monitoring local economic impact and also work on monitoring the impact of tourism in destinations. It's a critical part of what we plan to be doing over the next 4 or 5 years. The last panel, it's 2 people who are going to reflect on yesterday, and it's a tall order because it was a long day yesterday, at least as packed, in many ways perhaps more packed even than today in terms of the agenda. But Martin Brackenbury, who's the chair of the advisory board for our Centre for Responsible Tourism here at Manchester Met, sat through the whole of yesterday, made I think 14 pages of notes, Martin, if I remember accurately, and you're going to briefly summarise what you got out of yesterday and the questions it's left in your mind. And then Jason Freezer, who co-chaired yesterday with me from Visit England, is also going to say something, and then we'll go to the final closing. Thank you, Martin.
Good evening, everyone. Well, Harold has given us a weird topic, in my view, at the end of the day. I mean, who on earth wants to hear about what most of us heard anyway? Somehow regurgitating yesterday's news. Well, perhaps today's proceedings have been so rich we've already forgotten yesterday's. Anyway, here goes. Your view may well be very different from mine. I came up as a tourist yesterday on Virgin trains, an excellent service, and then found myself in the monastery, a kind of cathedral with an assembled choir. Yesterday was about how we attempt to manage destinations responsibly, with most of the case studies being from the UK, ranging from England, County Durham, cities, fascinating stories about Bath, Manchester, Lincoln, York, national parks and forests, as well as issues of connectivity, transport and the internet. They were consistently insightful and in some cases provocative presentations. More, I think, they were inspiring and energizing, displaying very high levels of competence, endeavor, passion and drive. What was my take on what we heard, and what questions did the sessions raise? Well, first of all, the frameworks for management that came out from all these different sessions were not dissimilar. So there was the questions of research, the creation of brands, product development, managing the visitor experience, the need for partnerships of trust among stakeholders to create a shared strategic direction embodied in a plan, integrating environment, visitors, residents and businesses. But there is difficulty of getting stakeholders on board and gaining consensus to a shared vision. The need for passionate, committed individuals to be involved is clear. Significant skills are required to lead, influence, cajole, and coordinate where there is no legislative clout. The next point, really, is that DMO's public funding is reducing, if not altogether disappearing. And private sector participation is coming in, but it appears to be only happening where they see direct commercial benefits. To my surprise, all were interested in more tourism, except perhaps York, which had some issues of congestion management. So here we were today, if you think about today, and we were all talking yesterday about more tourism. Some of the DMO marketing role has been superseded by a more trusted platform, that of TripAdvisor. Augmented reality, if you remember Tim Young talking yesterday, through Google Glasses, may yet replace TripAdvisor for the here and now of destinations. So we are on a journey of change as a result of technology. it seems to me that the place and role of DMOs within the system of town planners, local authorities, residents and businesses needs to be reviewed. Local authorities have a massive role but lack the funding for tourism. Destinations are places that are living, changing entities. They need to be nurtured like gardens. If they're not, to wither and to die. A constant process of regeneration and renewal is necessary. It was fascinating to think through the way in which these presentations were made, and everyone was concerned with conserving and enhancing the spirit of place for which they were responsible. The notion of places within destinations which actually create the attraction. Research and measurement is vital, but I would say performance is patchy, which actually is very much what you were arguing just before I started to talk. And managing destinations is a journey, but it is not new. If you remember when the discussions were occurring about Bath, it was said that Beau Nash in the 1740s and 50s was a one-man DMO for Bath, and as any reader of Jane Austen can attest, writing 50 years later. So it is something that other people have done successfully, and we are simply replicating that in the modern context. So what questions were raised? There are not many, only 5. To my mind, the first thing is that for practitioners such as us here, would we have got more out of the presentations if we'd been able to appreciate some of the tensions and difficulties that arise and how they were resolved? I remember last year I was in Barcelona and having to chair a session, and there's this chap from RTD8, Josep, I can't remember his surname, but I kept on pushing him, a remarkable man. How had he achieved these extraordinary things in RTD8, and how had he overcome the obstacles? But it was all, he was so humble, he didn't want to talk about how he'd overcome the obstacles. And yet, actually, for us to understand these things enriches our own experience and our capacity to practice better. So, work, as I say, arises where there are problems. So what about trade-offs between short and long term, between public and private, between strategic and tactical? These trade-offs are difficult. What about the, and this is a slightly peculiar way of looking at it perhaps, but what about the different languages each of these tribes speak, the planners, the local authorities, the businesses, the DMOs? How do they overcome their cross-cultural issues and tensions? Because we use a particular language here, and other people use a completely different language. And how do we actually find a way of bringing these together? I think it's actually quite an interesting anthropological issue, and will help us perform better if we were able to do it better. Second point. Sustainability was a frequently used word, but it was not clear whether that referred to the destination or to the DMO. And we need to be very clear that it should be about the destination, because the DMO is simply a mechanism for helping us manage destinations. The next point really is, should DMOs restrict their activities to focus on what is not done well by others, perhaps as a facilitator and catalyst, product development, business support, brand development and reputation? The fourth point is, how can DMOs work more effectively with planners? It was a very interesting discussion we had with the town planners and others, and to see the way in which these work or did not work, because town planners have such a long time horizon relating to infrastructure, but they have an immense impact on the way in which tourism actually works successfully or not, according to the decisions which are taken. And lastly, how can we accelerate making the 50% of SMEs digitally savvy? It was observed that 50% of SMEs still are not in any way digitally savvy. And I think that's an important issue to resolve. But all in all, an extraordinarily stimulating day. Jason, what did you think?
Thank you, Martin. That was great. I'm not quite sure how to follow that, but I will do my best. My perspective of yesterday is obviously going to be slightly different because I was probably worrying more about what was being said on Twitter and where the next speakers were coming from to make many notes, and my notes were not as clear perhaps as they should have been. But that's fine, I'll do my best. I found yesterday equally really inspiring, and it was quite refreshing to hear lots of the stuff that was coming out, and reassuring as well from some of the global perspectives that some of the things that we were hearing or seeing domestically in England are happening not only across Britain but in other parts of the world, although on reflection it would have been nice to hear a little bit more perhaps about some of the international destination management activities. I was particularly impressed by the energy in the room throughout the whole day. It didn't really feel as if it waned, even though I'm sure some of you individually perhaps were tired. I know I was fairly exhausted by the end of it. But it wasn't just the energy in the room, it's the engagement online. I thought it was phenomenal how much Twitter activity there was yesterday and how much there's continued to be today, although I am slightly regretting doing the selfie last night before when I left, but that's a separate matter. I should say that's because we had an English Tourism Week selfie thing that we were supposed to be doing. Before I go in, what I thought I'd do is just cover not necessarily the questions, but some of the common themes that I sort of observed. But just before I do that, I think one point, and perhaps a reflection for future events. I know you said there's not going to be one in England for another 10 years, but... we won't go there on, we're being filmed. But I think it's a bit of a shame that more of the destinations didn't stay today, because I think a lot of what was discussed today is absolutely relevant to the destination managers. We heard yesterday about the need for new conversations. We heard today about the need for breaking silos. And, perhaps it's slightly unrealistic that, some of these destination managers and chief execs of organisations, they do get quite sort of blinkered because they're doing the day job. They are struggling, as we heard yesterday, to find the funding, to get partners, to get support for what they're trying to do locally. And most of them really do want to do that horizon scanning. They do want to learn more, and we need to help them to build the capacity, which is partly what my role is. So perhaps in the future, kind of splitting some of those topics or interweaving some of them so we can actually get them to hear some of these messages, I think would be really, really useful. So some of the common themes, some of this you would have already heard. I think the importance of private sector and communities was great to see, and I think it was a comment somebody made to me who said there's actually not many private sector speakers. You heard a lot about the need to engage private sector and the role of the private sector in destinations, and I think we actually only had probably 1, 2, excluding the OTA session, I should say, but on the destination management ones there was not many pure private sector businesses. I think Alex was Paul from Suffolk Secrets. Was a hotelier as opposed to a kind of full-time destination manager. So it would be good, I think, on reflection, we perhaps should have had some more of those. But I think those examples of success were really, really interesting. And the interesting observation, I think, was that people kept saying, well, we need to be engaged in the private sector, but they're only really interested in short-term marketing activity. Actually, I think what destinations were perhaps thinking, or some of the comments was, is about they are interested about marketing, but you need to have the right conversation. And I think that success panel demonstrated that if you engage them on the topics, you have those conversations, they probably will be interested in more than just promotion. They are interested in product development. They are interested about their community because they need to be. It's their business. It's their place. So actually, and I've seen around the country when I go and see some very good destination management organisations, how engaging businesses on those topics can be really productive, and Durham is a great example of that. I've been to some of their tourism conferences. They get 200 businesses in a room with voting buttons, voting on every single action in their destination management plan. And that's not just about promotion. which leads me then to partnership and collaboration. That came out very consistently. And I think what wasn't perhaps said is destination management plans were talked about, but it's not actually the end document that I think is important. It's the process to get to that end document, because that's where you get the private sector and other public sector, third sector stakeholders on board, and of course the community. I was delighted that it came up several times, the thing of management, not marketing. It's a personal thing that I'm frequently saying to destinations in England. And I think it's right to say, although it wasn't said, that management often and probably should include marketing, but marketing rarely involves management, although it can, if marketing's done properly. And that's the other thing that wasn't said yesterday, was that actually what a lot of the destination organisations are doing is promotion. They can't usually do management in its full sense. They don't own the product. So it was interesting to hear that, and someone suggested, well, we should stop using DMOs. I think it was Nick Hall that said, why don't you just call them DOs? And interestingly, it's something that we in Visit England now, we do talk about destination organisations. We don't call them DOs because some bright spark said, yeah, call them DOs, and then they'll be calling don'ts. So it might have been Harold that said that. No,
no, but Harold would have.
I'm sure he would have. But I think there's a whole thing of, we talk about destination management organisations. James said from right at the beginning of the day, there's 200 destination organisations. A destination organisation for us is an organisation that is there. They might be doing marketing, they might be doing promotion, they might be doing development, but they're an organisation responsible for that in that place. Destination management organisations, and that's what, if we ever use DMO, that's what would be used. And I think you need to make that clear distinction, which came up yesterday. And I have to say, for the academics in the room, I also personally think that goes for the courses as well, because looking around the country, there's an awful lot of destination marketing courses. So, and I know that's something at MMU with the responsible courses is not the case. At MMU, that isn't the case. I know that. There was a focus on growth. You've already heard this from Martin, but I think what was lacking was an attempt to define it. What do we mean by growth? Somebody did allude to, I think Jane at the end of the day talked about not wanting more visitors. But actually, I think it's destinations do need to understand what they mean. Is it more visitors? Is it more value? Some places who are growing, they do need more people. There's others clearly that don't. The other thing, and Manda and Jane's session, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, and for me was one of the highlights of the day. Manda raised the question of needing to redefine what we mean by growth, and I think that's absolutely right. Some really challenging conversations, but I think it's absolutely the right question that we need to be asking. The need to learn from each other and not just focus about success. We've talked about that to come up today, I think, as well. Destination management should be about the place, not the organisation. Martin's already said a lot of the people, when they were talking about sustainability, they were really talking about their own organisation and perhaps not the sustainability of the place. And it's clear from that the conversations that those destination managers need to have with local stakeholders needs to change. I think it's was the other theme that came out is that that change is clearly happening. The pace of change has increased over the past few years. It will continue to change, in particular around the technological side of things. The question of Justin raised it. What is a destination organisation's role in marketing, in promotion? Especially when you've got Google, you've got TripAdvisor, all actually doing a lot of that themselves. Should their role be more strategic? Should it be about product development focused? Should it be about making the destination more coherent for visitors? Probably. All of those things, I'm sure, a lot more. But one of the most important things, and one of the things I think that needs to happen, and it's been said numerous times, is that the change that needs to happen is breaking this silo mentality. It's not, we've heard it lots and lots before, but if destination organisations want to be more sustainable, that's where they need to start. Talking to the town centre managers, talking to the other sectors. I thought Kathy was really insightful when she talked about place marketing and destination marketing. Same function, different words. So But what absolutely needs to remain, and this came out very, very clearly yesterday, is the importance of passion for that place. So, yeah, that's my thoughts. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. What's interesting is that you made something which happened only yesterday. You brought back alive something which I thought had happened about a month ago. So it was really great to have that to finish off. I think the only thing that remains for me to do is I particularly want to thank Lucy and Dario for the work they put in over the 2 days and for their volunteers. It's been a stunning experience running the conference. It will be the last one in England for a very long time. But it has, and I must also thank Manchester Met for supporting the conference. But John, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Harold. Right, Lucy. Lucy's giving me the 2-minute warning. Ladies and gentlemen, we have kept you to time. We've shown signs to you so you weren't allowed to go over time. So there's no way on this earth I can go on beyond 6 o'clock. And due to our colleagues telling us such wonderful things for the last 2 days, I think we have 1 minute and 50 seconds to do it in. So 6 months ago, Harold and I promised to bring the conference when we were in Barcelona to Manchester. People said we were crazy to organise another RTD conference in 6 months. Well, they were absolutely right, as it happened. We ain't going to be doing that again in a hurry. However, having said that, on behalf of Manchester Metropolitan University, which obviously employs both Harold and I, as well as some of our colleagues, we're absolutely delighted that we hosted this conference. We wanted to host this conference. We wanted the conference to come to England. And for us, I think it's been something more than just hosting a conference, because this is the beginning of a whole new direction for Manchester Metropolitan University, and particularly for our faculty. We are now making a massive commitment to developing responsible tourism, but also areas like responsible events, responsible fashion, responsible hospitality, and responsible food, and pretty well everything else. This is a major area for us. One of the brilliant things about this conference is not only been colleagues like yourself from other countries, from other parts of the UK and other universities, it's been a vehicle for us to get to know our own colleagues in other faculties of our own university. So we've had 2 benefits. So for us it's been very selfish. We've made a lot of contacts ourselves here, as well as making great contacts outside. The key thing for us is to make sure that now continues. So our master's programme in responsible tourism, you will know very well, launches next month. Okay, so that's our first of the 5 programmes. The other 4 happen next year. We have our Centre for Responsible Tourism now. We're advertising our PhD studentships. We're working on research with our colleagues. And we want to be tackling some of the other areas. Local economic development, we talked about. The role of the consumer. We had no time to ask questions about the consumer whatsoever. And so really, when the consumer people spoke earlier, we need to be looking at the consumer, not just the industry all the time. We want to do that as well. We want to focus on human rights, like the group spoke about earlier, and social inclusion. Sadly, the only group that really didn't take off was the one on social inclusion in the UK domestic tourism, with 3 or 4 people sitting in it. That tells us something we need to address in terms of social inclusion, needing to be a big priority, I think, for the future. We want to address those kinds of issues. And therefore, just before we finish, first of all, can I thank you very, very much indeed for coming. It's been a huge pleasure to have you with us. We'll save that for the very end. You need a big round of applause for yourself, I think. But when we had the earlier thank yous from Harold, we didn't really get a proper round of applause, I thought, for Dario and for Lucy. Lucy has been absolutely amazing. Lucy is the queen of conference organisation, the queen of event management organisation. So please stand up. Stand up, Lucy, and take it back. And Dario, likewise, who was one of my students many, many years ago in Switzerland at Caesar College of Switzerland, and he's now about to complete his PhD here. Again, round of applause, please, and stand up, Dario. But mainly, I think the last round of applause should be for yourselves. I know it sounds a bit strange, but I think we should give ourselves a round of applause. We've worked very hard for 2 days, and hopefully the beginning of a lot of new things from tomorrow in particular. Hope you're able to join us. That's going to be really exciting if you're still here tomorrow morning. Please give yourselves a round of applause.